Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today to discuss the first four chapters of Ships of Merior, to show off my hardcover. So we have a group today. We're going to be we talk four chapters every 2 weeks, and we're doing the first four this week. Lots of hardcovers out there. So Chibi Poo, will you start us off with the introductions, please?
Of course. As always, I'm Chibi Poe. I'm a longtime reader of Janny's works and these books here. I post some reviews here and there, and stuff on Twitter, and that's about it.
Nice. My name's Chris Moen. I sometimes make YouTube videos, sometimes appear on Steve's channel talking nonsense as far as kind of put it. Not necessarily about me, but just in general as a theme. It's about ideas, and sometimes good, sometimes not. But yes, first time reader of this book and the series in general.
Nice. Jared?
My first time reading Ships of Merior 2. I'm a weekend warrior for a YouTube channel, and I'm enjoying this thoroughly.
Nice. And Robin?
Yeah, I'm Robin. I have a YouTube channel, Bookend and Biscuits, which I sometimes post to. And I guess a long time reader of Janny Wurts because of her other series, but first time reader of this series and this book in particular. Enjoying it greatly, so looking forward to the discussions.
Nice. And Varsha?
Hi, I'm Varsha. I have a tiny YouTube channel called Reading by the Rainy Mountain, on which I also post very occasionally, but most recently not a lot. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I have read some other books by Janny Wurts, and this is my first time through this series.
Nice. So getting back into the series, I think the little break we had was a nice break, but I will say that these first few chapters felt it felt like a change of pace from maybe because the last book ended on such this intense note that these ones felt almost like you could relax a little bit.
Yeah. And I found myself liking Darker a lot more in this one. It was a lot more fun. It was mostly, I didn't like him very much in the previous book, but I do now.
Well, one thing I noticed right off the bat that this book doesn't have a prologue like most books do. Just starts right off the bat with chapter 1, and we're jumping right in like 5 years later, I think, from the end of the last book, and so there's a lot of like catching up that we have to do, and I noticed that it's like Steve said, it's a lot slower pace. There's a lot of us getting a sense of where they're at, and there's apparently there's some sort of peace that was brokered, I believe, and held since that last final battle, and and you see Dakar up to his old tricks, getting in trouble with drink and the law and stuff like that. So that was amusing, and it was actually fun to read on that part of it. And I was surprised at how thorough Arathon's disguise was, that Dakar wouldn't notice him at all. That was that ties into whatever magic they're applying there or something like that, and so that was interesting to see right off the bat.
It's interesting how sort of whimsical the first chapter is in some ways as they kind of go along. You think back to the previous book, so much heavy world building and lots of names, all that kind of stuff. And here it's just kind of following Dakar around at the start as he's kind of falling from bar to bar, kind of still being a bit of an oaf, still being a bit of a fool. And even by the end, when he gets himself into trouble, it's still in this kind of dumb kind of way. He kind of falls into trouble. And you're kind of going, oh dear. And there was that lovely moment, as you said, Jared, where it's like, will he or will he not recognize Arathorn, and we're left there in tenterhooks as the thing, and then the line is something like, it was not anybody he recognized, and you're like, oh, right, okay.
Mhm.
Because you're thinking this is such coincidence that they've come together at this stage, especially for the most hunted man in the galaxy, so to speak.
Right.
That he basically travels on his party, and he's like, I don't know who he is. I just know the other guy. He's famous. He's Justin Bieber.
Now I'm gonna always have an image of Justin Bieber reading about him now.
No.
No. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We can strike that from the record.
Bruce Springsteen. I don't know. We gotta go for somebody else.
I would actually, you might have missed it, but I'd actually say Dakar does realize it, just only when he's completely smashed drunk.
Mm.
Like subconsciously in his nightmares and whatnot, you see little bits there where, he's plagued by them. So he knows on some level, but he's kind of willfully denying that fact because he doesn't want to. He's just like, whatever, it's like he can't possibly be him. This dude is obliging and nice, and Arathon is an evil little bastard.
It's interesting. I wondered how much of that was the magic play, maybe shadow magic, because he did seem to be figuring it out nearly step by step. That who is this guy, and he pulls back the hood and all the rest of it, and then almost it's like a veneer comes across him to say, "Oh, I don't know, could be anybody."
I agree. I thought it was. Oh, okay.
I was to say there's one important fact that we know from the end of Curse that Dakar doesn't know, and so that's also misleading him because he doesn't know that fact. So when he triggers his mage sight and whatnot, expecting a reaction out of Arathon, he's not going to get one, and so he's like, okay, this can't be Arathon, but he doesn't know why he's not getting one.
That's interesting.
So did he not get a reaction out of Arathon because Arathon has lost his own mage sight, or was it because he was just schooling himself to not react?
No, it was the mage sight. Yeah, he doesn't have that. So, as far as Medlier could tell, Dakar was just waving his fingers in his face. I mean, Arathon probably knew what he was doing, but just from reasoning it out. But
Yeah, because I was going to say that was one of the things that I was thinking about, how he was keeping up his disguise, and I guess it must be from the other mages, because obviously it put in there quite a lot that he didn't have his power anymore, or that he occasionally felt it when he was playing, but apart from that, it wasn't around or hadn't come back yet. So it was interesting to see how that was being applied to him if it wasn't directly from him.
So did Arathon lose his ability to weave shadow as well at the end of the last book, or just lose mage sight?
just mage sight. His access to and anything he can do with shadow still remains. He can't amplify it with magic, but he could I think he can affect color spectrum too. So he could absolutely.
Oh, I see.
Himself.
Oh, I misgot that completely. I thought he'd lost all of his abilities as part of the thing, not just part of it. But I obviously misread that.
I think at the end of the last book, he was still weaving shadow, but after he had lost his mage sight, if I remember correctly, he was doing some magic, but he couldn't see the world at the level that mages could, I think.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's clarified, because that could get very confusing for me.
And was it explained how exactly he lost the mage sight? Was it by choice, or was it something that happened to him? I kind of missed that.
At the end of during the fight at the end of Curse, there's a point where they get cornered by some headhunters, and he uses his mage gifts to unmake, as he puts it, a thing, which is an abuse of the talent, and it like feedback and shock, does damage to the pathways that he channels the magic through. So apparently they'll heal, but there may be something else that's preventing him from you know uh, using his power. So
Oh, okay. And so it's been 5 years and he's still in that state.
correct.
That's pretty significant. Yeah.
And Layla's listening in. Spoilers are okay. I'm on page 50, and we'll catch up this week.
Yeah. And I noticed like the rest of the first chapter kind of serves to catch us up what they've been up to for the past 5 years through the this section called Petition, which is kind of more about focused on Arathon. And then there's a section called Grant that's kind of more focused on Lysair. And it was kind of good to get that background, of where they all are and like what's been going on the past 5 years. So I thought that was well done.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because Arathorn, it's the contrast of two characters, isn't it? Arathorn's almost like living his best life. He's as afflicted by the curse as anybody else,
Yeah.
insofar as, but he's just living his dream. And I suppose Lysair is as well, but in a much more, dark and foreboding way than Arathorn. He's very prominent and kind of needs to get his face out there, whereas obviously, Arathorn's hiding for a lot from a lot of scrying eyes. As it turns out.
It was quite interesting how you had that. You had like this whole entire kingdom, like he's the worst thing in the world, and we've got to smash him, we've got to kill him, and Arathorn's just there like, no, living my dreams, don't even care about them. So yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah, I admit when I first while I was familiar with her stuff when I first picked the series up, this was actually my first book in the series. So I had not read Curse at all when I read this one.
Oh wow!
I just found it in a bookstore or somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, I know this artist and this author," because I'd read other stuff by her. So I was like, "Okay, I gotta get this." So I got it and I read it, and I read that copy until the cover was falling off. So it was a very
That's awesome,
very well loved copy, but it. It was like, I don't know who any of these people are or what's going on, except, this dude's being hunted down by these people for some reason. And I don't know. I was kind of like, I don't really like this blonde-haired guy. I think he's a twit. It's kind of my first impression of him. I'm like, okay, so he's sitting around in this town, comfortable and all, and sending people out to try to hunt down a dude who's just running around as a minstrel's apprentice.
Right. But did you come back on that opinion a little bit when you got to the first book after that?
I did come back a little bit, but for a while, reading the series, I was, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a fan of him now, but I was not much of a fan of Lysair at all.
I could
kind of come around to where I really feel bad for him at this point.
It comes to one of the main talking points I have of these first 4 chapters. Lysair, and this could just be me, I read him as a dictator here at the start, as somebody that's very hell-bent on ethnic cleansing. It's not just Arathon that he's looking to wipe out. Anybody that follows him, and he's used very much as the stick when he's trying to win support to say, all the ills that you have within your life are because of these people. It's very much like sort of Nazi Germany or something, where they were saying, actually, these are bad times that everybody's having, but it's because of these people. And if we can just root them out and side with me, then we do it. And you can see Lysair manipulates each different group that he goes to with a different version of his truth. And I thought that was really interesting how that was portrayed, because he's still sort of one of the main protagonists of the book that you're supposed to sort of root for. And you don't totally hate them. He still falls into that realm of, we prefer Arathorn, but he's still somebody we're hoping comes good at the end and has a redemption arc and all of those things. So,
well, that is a huge gambit he plays, basically going broke so he can try to manipulate manipulate somebody into raising an army for him. That's kind of That's a big play.
Yeah, and that it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's a big play as well because he doesn't necessarily know that they're not going to kill him. I know he assumes that they're not going to kill him, but really just to rely on the fact that they still think of him as their king in the future, it was quite a big gamble for that as well. Not just the fact that the town would give him an army, but the fact he would even survive the running in the pass anyway. So, yeah, big ask.
Yeah. I wonder if he had guest honor, right? So maybe he sort of knew that they wouldn't kill him, but that's not true for the rest of his army. They had them completely trapped, so they could have killed every single one. They just stole from them, like, or took their stuff from them instead.
Yeah. It
I
was a big
also,
risk.
huge risk. I don't know, I can't remember her name, but the person who's like running the place in his stead currently. I like the way through the books there's a real importance or thought process on what she wears when she meets certain people. So like she wore that black one when she was meeting someone else. On this one, he picked out that she'd worn the significant that she was trying to give something away, but what she was wearing to him at that point as well. And I thought that was really interesting how she's kind of setting her presence by actually what she's wearing when she meets them. I thought it was an interesting detail I really liked.
Yeah. And to add to that, like, it was also interesting that she wore the same thing, I think, both when she met Arathon's representatives and her own king as well, possible king. Yeah.
Yeah, but
There was sorry, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Portia,
I was going to start a new topic, so maybe go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say about Talith was, I think it's interesting. While he's sort of set up as the dictator, he uses her, and she's very much a willing member in his planning. You know, and what he's going to do. He's very much, and not using her in a way that he's controlling her. He's using her for what he sees as the right moment to use her, and has a very prominent role to play in the kingdom and in the setting up of his kingdom.
Yeah. I think I have a feeling we haven't seen a lot of Talith yet, other than to be told that she's very beautiful. So I will talk about it later, but there was a point in this book when I decided I like Ilera. Like, there are some characters for whom I can pinpoint the specific location where I'm like, here's where I like this person. And I think I did that for Ilera this time, and I have a feeling I like Tanith later on. Yeah. I'll start a somewhat connected but newish topic. I think in the last book there were some points where it felt like Lyser's, sure, he's being cursed by the Mistwraith and he's being used sort of to hurt Arathon. But there were some statements in there like, the Mistwraith wouldn't have found room where there was none to manipulate Lyser this way. But I think there was something that the Fellowship discovered this time that feels like maybe it's a lot deeper than that. That maybe Lysa really is very helpless in how the Mistwraith is controlling his mind or whatever, influencing how he behaves. So I thought that was interesting. So we got one perspective then, and then now it feels like a little bit of a, not necessarily pivot, but a different opinion into that.
A little bit. It's more that as long as further away you put things from involving Arathon, the more of its own self-awareness and the real person will shine through. But if it comes up to the topic of Arathon, or anything that he feels that Lysair feels is unjust, then that's where it's been completely twisted around. So it's like you gotta separate it away from that, and he gets to be more of who he's supposed to be.
But now he's surrounded himself with an agenda that basically occupies his mind fully with Arathon, right? So yeah,
Pretty
maybe.
much everything is a piece to,
Mm,
on the board for the goal of making Arathon dead.
yeah. So here's another question in that regard. Arathon knew that he was about to be cursed, so he knew to protect himself and knows not to react to, or knows to prevent himself from reacting whenever he has the urge to kill Lysair. But Lysair does not have that awareness. Do we think that Lysair would behave differently if he did know that this is a result of the curse and not his own sense of justice that's leading him in this direction?
I think for me, that's all part of Lysia's lack of training, isn't it? The fact that
Mm.
he was not attuned. He was almost like a helpless victim here, which I think is where the idea that we feel sorry for Lysia comes from, was because it's not totally his fault. He just hadn't never been prepared for what actually happened to him. Whereas I actually love that scene within the 4th chapter of the book where they took apart and went back into the scran of it, and they nearly hit the pause button on the DVD and said, actually pause it here and zoom into this bit, and actually what do you see? I thought that was so cleverly done. They actually show the moment of it happening as they try and take apart and dissect actually what they could see from a moment to moment.
Yeah, I like the sorcerers. You get a look at what the sorcerers can do in that chapter and like what they're partially capable of. That was pretty cool. And we got to remember also that Lysair is also very young still, even though it's 5 years later. He's still a young man, and it's as I know, young men are prone to mistakes.
He'd be 31 or 32 at this point, right around there.
Maybe, yeah.
Because he was in upwards of 25 when the story started. So
yeah, was it Arathon that was like 24?
He's a bit younger.
Or thereabouts. Arathon was about 3
Arathon,
years.
right?
Yeah, I remember Janny saying somebody was 24 or something like that. I forget who it was, but
As far as Varsha's question, I'm just going to say spoilers.
Okay.
That's probably what it's called.
Okay,
That will, be something that comes up.
that's interesting.
Yeah, so
That's really good. Yeah, I'm pleased about that, because at the moment it would be nice to see some conflict in him, because at the moment he's just down that alleyway. He's running full tilt ahead. It would be nice to have a little conflict in him, I think, to bring it back to like, oh God, what have I done, sort of thing. I think I would enjoy that. So it would be good if we see that in the future.
Well, if we consider them one book, then if you're looking at hardcover, you'll see some of that within this volume. If you're looking at the hardcover, if you're not looking at the hardcover, then you'll see it in a little bit of it in Warhost.
Oh yeah, because they're split, aren't they? Yeah. Okay.
For paperback, and then
I do like how we go to revisit scenes and it not feel like the wool was pulled over our eyes the first time. Because it'd be very easy to kind of say, oh, yeah, you do miss this, or like revisionist history, of going back and revisiting it. No, we only had one angle of looking at it, and then coming to revisit things that happened can feel fresh then, and just feel like, oh, this is just new information. This gives me insight into either thought processes or what people could do or who was controlling the situation.
But chapter 2 gave us a very good contrast, because we see what Lysair is up to as far as chasing down this evil shadow sorcerer that he proclaims. But then we see Halloran sing this song that's a complete opposite story of what Lysair is pushing, and I love how that was done with when we had that song in there that's sung to this bar that doesn't seem very receptive to what he's saying. They just like the song, but he's saying pretty much the opposite. He's praising Arathon and not Lysair, whereas the normal news being put out by Lysayers that Arathon needs to be taken down. So that was very cool, I thought, especially since then that guy goes and gets them all in trouble as well. But after that,
Going back to the Decker conversation earlier, I think it's in general, I think it's super awesome where I think Steve, you were saying we're getting, it feels like a different pace because I feel like because we know the characters, we're now just getting a little bit of backfill about them. And like it was so interesting learning a little bit more about Decker and his powers and how old he was as well. I thought was really interesting. I was like, oh okay. He's very old. And the fact that he can do longevity and so on and so forth. Like you got much more of an understanding of him a little bit. I think I'm really hoping you get more, but you get that with all the characters, and I really enjoyed that. I was like, oh, finally we get a little bit more personality and understanding of where they've come from and where they do things. I thought it was very well done because you had a little bit more time.
Yeah, and we also see how old Halaron's getting too. It's mentioned in there that he's not going to be around for much longer. I think that's just a sense I got.
Did anyone worry? Because I was like, well, if Arathon has to go be a king, who's going to be the master bard?
He's going to be Justin Bieber.
Yeah. I was like, oh, this is such a waste.
Yeah, but did get some insight into why Dakar drinks, and why he kind of he kind of has fallen into this way of trying to dull the nerves or just kind of get away from it. But isn't it so interesting that he couldn't recognize Arathon, but actually within the seven, they know exactly who Arathon is. Like I thought that was a really nice reveal coming out to say actually that, I wonder how long till everybody finds out kind of thing, and they're doing everything to distract from looking over there by setting things up over here and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, that's a really nice reveal. We got a couple of those, especially in that chapter, where we get, I didn't know that they were aware of that, or that they didn't know that,
Yeah.
And I think it was also interesting that Arathon sort of trusts the seven with information about his whereabouts. I mean, I guess he didn't really have a choice because Sethvir would have found out probably. But also, it's interesting that his disguise. What is it about his disguise that prevents the enchantresses from figuring out where he is? Right? Is it just that he's moving about so much, plus his disguise, that they can't find him? Are they looking essentially for his physical characteristics, or are they looking for something else? That well, they
Or are
can't.
or are the sorcerers like
go Jared.
Yeah, you guys go. Yeah, are the sorcerers the ones putting the wool over their eyes? That's what I was wondering about.
Combination.
Yeah, is that okay?
Makes
Like
sense.
it's mentioned, like in Curse, that like the casting of the curse and how it affected both Lysair and Arathon changed their spiritual pattern, whatever term you want to use for it, and affected that. So, the Coriani are looking for one thing, but usually looking in the wrong place. Plus, the seven throwing up, it's like, oh, well, we're doing this over here, but it has nothing to do with you, but it's going to screw up your thing. And they're like, and she's like, oh, there was, inadvertent interference from them. I'm like, wow, you have no idea. They wrecked your thing on purpose.
Right.
And there's also not the big outpourings of power that they're probably looking for from Marathon. Somebody who's as powerful as he is. They mentioned about Dakar's even manipulation of the bugs, I suppose, whatever way you want to talk about it, how that could have drawn attention. They kind of float that idea in there. And if he's literally only very sparingly playing the guitar or not playing the guitar, or the ramp as it is, then there's none of that to be found. He's just a dude.
Just a dude.
Just a dude.
Has Ilera seen Arathon play? Because I can't remember if that was in the thing that they did at the end of the book, when the enchantresses found out information about Arathon. Did they also know that he was a good musician?
Not that I recall.
Not
I don't know that they would care actually.
Well, I guess I was thinking about it from the point of view of like
Find him.
looking for someone who plays like what Chris mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh,
although I think it's Laura kind of says she knows who he is at his heart. You know, she can sense him just from his actions and who he is as a person, and try not to use that. So maybe she does know at some level.
Yeah.
Just jumping right in with just wild guesses about what's going to happen with everything. Wild, inappropriate guesses that aren't going to come true. Does anyone think that she's going to end up the what's it called?
The time.
Oh, the matron, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or that's going to be a route to go down because
Good
it's
question.
it's leaning like because the other lady's just so horrible and they're getting a little bond on, and I'm like, is this
Well,
going to happen?
At the end of chapter 4, there we get a peek at the magic that grants longevity. That's what
That's right.
That's what they're
Crystal.
starting to perform for her, and so that kind of gives us an idea that might be the future. But whether or not that's going to happen,
Yeah.
It's probably going to it's probably leading you that way, and then it'll be like, actually no, and I'm like,
It could end up as a bit of conflict within the Coriani, though, when she does pass on. That there is a split with half the people think and half the other people think, and you end up. I have to say that whole part, actually, a lot of this setup reminds me so much of Wheel of Time. It is so on the nose. The curse is the male taint. They're hunting for the bad guy. The Red Aja are hunting for one body, etc. There's so much of it that's very reminiscent, except rather than institutions doing it, it's individuals doing it, and there's not much more character work here, and they're doing it through the manipulation of character and the manipulation of people, rather than necessarily, that's this whole body that are doing this, or this whole council that's doing this, or this whole board that's doing it. So,
well, these are our favorite fantasy tropes.
They are, yeah,
and of course, Janny's doing an awesome job of making them really, really good for us.
But it's that's what I was going to say. Like it's the same kind of trope, but it feels different. Do you know what I mean? It's almost hidden in plain sight, and I think partly because we're kind of going into this quite deeply. It feels like we're thinking we're going to have to talk about this in a couple of chapters' time. What do I see? What do I think? It forces you to kind of evaluate it more than you probably would if you were reading from cover to cover.
Yeah.
Speaking of the end of, you mentioned the end of chapter 4, the end of chapter 1. Just feel like we're being set up for heartbreak, aren't we? With I forget her name, Teleth and Lysir. The last paragraph. Exalted and imprisoned by shameless happiness, Lady Teleth blinked back rising tears. What was Avenor to become if we built but a broader base of support for wider campaigns and more armies? She understood with a rage that drove her to hate them more fiercely. Lysir would never have peace, nor would he ever fully become hers until the day the Master of Shadow was found and run down to finally safely put to death. So it's
I would say she's doomed.
Yeah, it's like
It's not heartbreak if you don't like them, though. If you don't like the couple, it's not heartbreak.
It's too early. That's what you're saying, Rob.
There's more couples we don't like that other series.
But no, definitely. I think that romance is not going to end well. But I'm like, well, she probably deserves it. I don't know.
She made her choices.
She wore the black dress, right? She wore. She knew. Yeah.
I cannot say anything.
Oh, geez, yeah, of course not.
I'm not saying anything.
I'm not confirming. I'm not denying. If I say anything, I will say of the characters we've seen so far, the 3 that I think get a lot of important focus across ships and Warhost, if you're reading them that way, are Elara, Talith, and Dakar. We have the others, of course, Erethan and Lysair and others, but there's a lot of interesting developments across the entirety of arc 2 for those 3.
Good.
Yeah, I thought over the course of these 160 odd pages in the paperback, we spent very little time with Lysair and Arathon, like just hanging out with them. It was mostly all the other characters. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
And also welcome, because they're the people that we've seen least in the first book. We've seen a lot of
Yeah.
Lysair and Arathon. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And one
I
thing I like. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. You go.
So one thing that I do like is when you do see Lysair and Arathon, a lot of it, you're not in their head. You're seeing them through the lens of somebody else.
That's true.
It's especially prominent here, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, there are moments you'll get into their head, for sure, but you just the take is like, oh yeah, no, we're seeing Arathon through Dakar's point of view, which is understandably biased and so forth, and or Lysair through Talith's eyes, and so on.
Yeah.
And I really like the way she does that.
Yeah, she doesn't box us in with point of view. She gives us the story that she needs to give us. I noticed that. I notice a trend nowadays to have these strict point of view chapters and stuff like that. But she really gives us everything we need as far as to bring that story forth. I like the style.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, Varsha. No.
I was going to say, on that subject, in the scene where they cast strands again, last time we saw it through Dakar's point of view, and this time through Varane. That's his name, right?
Yes.
And so I was thinking, we see it through the point of view of someone far less powerful than one of the Fellowship sorcerers. So we get only the information that A, they think is important, and B, is probably vastly incomplete, because I think there's a thing at the end of the previous book when Traith tells Ilera that she's significant to Arathon's well-being or whatever, but we don't see any of that when they cast the strands from Dakar's point of view, right? So I thought that was interesting, because we get a lot of information, but it's still pretty incomplete. Maybe we'll find out more from both the castings later on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep.
And it's also revealed how they know some of these things. When they do this prediction in the future, we see that it's through the scrying. They can kind of just take the herbs and kind of do that, and see some point in the future, and then say, actually, well, we see you there at this stage, or that you are holding him or something. That would give it away. And it does kind of mean, a bit like Jared said, that every time we get a new point of view or another way to look at it, it can very skillfully just be given to us as just another layer, another bit of the story, or another bit of the motivation, without it feeling like a cheat.
I really, really adored the part where you've got them all coming together, where they go visit the V guy. I can't remember his name.
Varane?
Yeah, with the cats. I loved the whole way that scene was done, down to like the food, down to having the tea ready, their interactions, the discussions they were having. I thought that was so like cozy and awesome, and it gave again loads of information. Like they told you how crazy dangerous the scrying is, which I think was alluded to previously, but then they highlight it by saying that the ethereal, again, I'm terrible with names, but he died. That's how he lost his corporeal form. Like, that's how he, where? Because that's how he became the incorporeal. Can't say that word either. I'm doing really well. And that's how he lost it, which I think I didn't realize, because if you think Arathon just scries randomly in the forest before the fight, and how much of a risk was he taking? Like, he could have died during that scrying, and it just wouldn't have lasted how it did. So I thought there's all these things she just drops in, and you're just like, oh my god. And then I just but I like the cats and the wizards, because I thought that was just the way they did that whole scene was just brilliant. How they bounced off of each other and the discussions, that was probably my favorite part.
Yeah, so really good. It's like, these guys are colleagues who've known each other for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But it's something I thought of as, a lot of people like, when they ask about the magic and everything, and how it just sort of slides under the radar, that how immensely powerful these guys are. And I thought about it, and I realized that it's because it's to them, when you look at it for like the Seven and everything, it's not an impressive, crazy, from their point of view, it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's
All
just
right.
stuff they can do. So they don't, what would seem absolutely terrifying to, someone who can't do that. To them, it's like, yeah, well, I don't know, this is Tuesday. I kind of feel it's like, I mean, not to say they take it lightly, but it's a thing that they're used to.
Yeah.
So they don't think of it in the same terms.
But they prepare accordingly. Like, it is a dangerous thing, but they are prepared. They are worried for each other. They know that it could go wrong, but actually within safe hands and know where to push, they are comfortable within it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing, that seeing the casting, at least from Dakar and Varaine's point of view, gives us, is the sense of how powerful the magic is that they're doing at that moment, and also the risks that they are taking also, I suppose. Yeah.
It was also a good contrast between Varaine and Dakar, and how they approached the scrying, because Dakar was kind of just all over the place, and you could see someone who takes their training a little more seriously is a lot more grounded. That wasn't like going off on random tangents and needing someone to put a hand on his shoulder and hey, focus.
Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things about that whole chapter 4 is that the language is no less complex than it is in any other chapter, and I think it spoke to actually how comfortable you're getting with the style of writing, the use of language, exactly how easy that the whole chapter was to read within what was quite an intricate kind of scene. That there was a lot of projection, there was a lot of things happening in the present. It could have and should have probably been very easy to get lost between what was happening in the vision, what was happening between the characters, and what was happening in the present, and it just didn't feel like that. I think I felt probably more comfortable than any other part of the book actually reading that section.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was one of my favorite chapters so far, because we got to see the Fellowship in a lot closer detail.
Yeah.
And I guess the camaraderie between them as well. Yeah. And a lot of information that we got about the world, like the fact that what you mentioned earlier, Robin, that Cardamon didn't voluntarily become incorporeal. I thought that was a decision you could take. Maybe it is, but yeah, that's, and I guess it seems to be a farm that they don't necessarily want to be in. Yeah, even though it apparently gives them advantages, like they can go out into the stars.
They can
No,
come
I agree.
back from it.
I fully agree, because they last book, it was very much like he is just like that, and it felt like it definitely felt like some of them had just chosen to be that, like, they were so powerful that they could be that. But yeah, to know that it had been almost an accident was kind of like, oof, okay, interesting.
Yeah, and the fact that they're worried about trait also, whether or not. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, we were speculating at the end of Christmas Mystery with whether it meant when they were incorporeal they were actually dead. It was like the next stage of their evolution, whereas now it feels like a fluid state, that they could, depending on their mission or what they need to do, they can kind of be in one or other. So.
Yeah. At least if they still have their bodies, but
yes,
it
indeed.
seems like you can lose it. So what about the sorcerer that went out of trying to figure out? So it seems like the worlds are elemental, right? Like they have specific forms of worlds. Like there's a water world and there's an ice world and a desert. I don't remember what else Luhain was looking at, but yeah, I'd love to find out more about what Luhain is up to. That was really interesting.
I also had a question. This is me not being able to do maths and things, but how many of them are there currently? Is it 5? And then there's 4, and then there's one missing one, and then there's the one traitor one. who's been put to wherever. So that's one missing.
There's one missing. Davian, who's the betrayer, who's
Yeah.
nowhere. Salatus is the missing one, and then Caradmon is off doing his thing, and they haven't heard from him in a little while.
He's off for trying to find the
The province.
unicorn people. Yeah.
No, he's tracking. Caradmon's trying to find.
Oh yes,
information
the
about this race.
yeah. That was it.
Oh yes. the
Okay, yeah.
disc,
So 2 people are kind of off on missions. One's a traitor, and the rest of them are okay. Thank you.
I had a question about Arathon seemed to send a magical message to the sorcerers at the end of chapter 3 there. Did he get a response? I couldn't remember if he got a response to that.
He hasn't received the response yet. Sethvir, before he heads off to Mirthlane,
Yeah.
is starts writing things down.
Right. Okay.
And and gives, if I remember correctly, gives Sandir some stuff to deliver to Arathon.
Okay. And then in the 4th chapter in the disclosure sections, it mentions something about tapping a power lane as a means of passage. So that was another form of like powerful magic that we kind of got introduced to that I wasn't quite aware of before, and I thought that was very interesting.
I think we did meet that in the last book
Did we?
when they went from after they dealt with the snakes, they used that same lane to go to Rathain, I guess the first place where Arathon gets his made sight about the Paravians.
So Asanda used that
Mhm.
power?
Yeah, the first time to Althane, and then again
Okay.
after the snakes.
Yeah.
They drug Lysair, and knocked him out. Or Aerith, him and Aerith.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense now.
But I think, like a lot of the book, these kind of ideas will, every time they get used, we'll understand a bit more about them.
Yeah,
That's the way I always feel about
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And there's so much information packed into these things.
Yeah.
It's easy to miss this stuff sometimes.
We did get to see it in a lot more detail in this book though, than we did last time. But yeah.
Yeah, I often feel like with these chats, I should have a right. I didn't quite understand this. Somebody fill in the blank for me. Part,
Trying to remember the I guess the scrying into the past with Myrtlewane snakes, the hate rates, that was very interesting. And I guess they similarly, so they did say that they are different than the mist rate, but I didn't fully understand how. I don't know if I missed that or if it wasn't explained.
On which bit when the Mistwraith was transferring into, or the curse was being enacted at that part, Farsha? The bit that I took from that is that it's hacked the individual. They were looking to see whether it would go down through generations if they had children, whether it would, it was part of the genetic makeup, or whether he was surprised to find that it was just attached to the individual and to the sense of person and the sense of self, which I think is why they were kind of looking at, they were looking at separation. So if we actually rip this thing out, what will happen, Lysair, what will happen, Arathon? And the idea was that they will be dead. Now, in my eyes, this is my engineering head coming on. Well, what else can you try there? Well, you've got to bring them close to death and see if the Mistwraith will try and survive. That's where I think that's going. Right?
Oh, that's so cool.
Are we doing experiments on them now?
Well, they were doing experiment in the little plot with the frogs and all the rest of it. They were basically saying if we inject these people in and we try and separate them, actually what happens, then the thing just dies, essentially. But they didn't do any more experiments after that. But I think that's the thing then, the experiment with next. Bring it close to death does Does the Mistwraith actually being alive want to live and therefore leave? That would be my guess.
Well,
Layla had
they pulled the wraith out of Lysair, so no one's possessed at this point. They've just been cursed in Erethan's case.
Yeah.
That's the curse. Yes,
Twisted up.
that's right.
And a big mess with Lysair, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And, Lily had a question about what is everyone's view of the portrayal of the prophecy in the series so far, reliable or not?
Is this the question of the unreliable narrator or not?
I think it comes down to that idea of how they're getting the prophecies. Is it that scrying in the future and seeing one scene and then kind of reverse engineered from that? So in which case, you're seeing a snapshot, but you're not necessarily seeing the events that lead up to it. I think that was kind of, they could see possibly the idea that in the future, Arathon and Lysair had got rid of the Mistwraith, from the land, but actually the fallout of that or otherwise. But I think sort of in that idea, everybody's an unreliable narrator then, because it's literally perception of a snapshot.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think a lot of it I don't know, how I read it is that they do this like looking forward, but then stuff that happens can change that. So as you said, it's kind of like this is one path where it could go, but if this doesn't happen, then that's not going to happen. So then the prophecy changes to something else. Like the big one, obviously, was the fact that we're going to get rid of the Mistwraith, but then the other ones have seemed to be very, very much more moment fixed. Like it could happen, but then Arathon goes and does something, and that won't happen, sort of thing. So changeable, I think, would be my view on the prophecies.
Yeah. They are basically like, this is, or in like the one case with the Mistwraith, it's like this thing will happen, but we don't know. We don't really know any details as to how or why until Arathon and Lysair showed up, and then they were like, "Oh, so that's it." But then they're like, "Wow, this is not something we would have done."
Layla also mentions Descartes and the Fellowship sorcerers take it seriously, but things don't go as planned. Arathon claimed his royal title as prophesized, but now they are dealing with the curse.
Right. That royal title hasn't been all it's cracked up to be.
Well, I would be curious, with as far as Arathon though, would you say he's embraced kingship? Is the specific words where this will take root on the day that Arathon's the fallen embraces kingship? And
I don't think so. Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that he's really doing much embracing of kingship in this book.
No, I'd say he's running away from it, if anything.
Writing top 10 hits.
But he seems to come across, like, even when Descartes viewing him, he's obviously, like you said at the beginning, Steve, he's coming across as a much nicer person, more relaxed, more happy. Like, is that just him when he hasn't got any of this responsibility looming over him? Because it seems like since when he was very young, he's had a lot of this, because he was like one of those like high performers, had a lot of, his dad was this, his dad was that, and now he's like just chilling, doing his own thing. Is that just him in his happy bubble? Like, is that him normally?
Yeah. I mean, obviously he's not entirely free of, but yeah, that's a good insight into just him as, if he didn't have any of this, weighing down on him.
And Layla's wondering if Dakar is a chaos agent or a sage.
Yes.
Why not both? Why not both?
Chaos.
Yeah.
Dakar as a sage.
Well, no, we kind of brought him up, and he doesn't appear much in this one, but he was, there briefly in one scene at the first chapter. Well, what did everybody think to see our Earl of the North all grown up with Jirrit?
Oh,
yes.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Uh,
interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and he's also referred to by Manel, is it? As well as when she's talking to Lycia as well, she talks about Jarrett, and actually that disappointed me a little bit because I actually hoped Manel was going to be a somebody that wasn't involved but seen the truth for what it was. You know, Lycia was saying, "Oh, this is what's happening." She says, "Well, actually, I don't see that," but actually, it turns out she is in contact with Arathorn and with Jarrett, and and so she is involved in it. You know, as an antagonist to Lysair and his merry band and his army.
Yeah, we fell into the another example of the oh yeah, if you're not with me, then oh yeah, you're just deluded.
Mm-hmm. Everybody has to pick a side.
Yeah.
But if I'm thinking a bit, oh,
Go ahead. No, go.
Okay. I see. Jared was the person that is essentially Arathon did the brother thing with, right? At the
Yes.
last book.
The bonding, yeah.
And then in this book, he's the guy that's now leading the group of people that are getting hunted, essentially.
Like,
The fact that he's still doing that and still kind of, I guess I know he's being persecuted, but he's still doing it and still holds Arathon in somewhat a good stead, even though he knows he knows he's not around, he's missing. His viewpoint or how he portrayed his feelings about Arathon was kind of still friendly, even though I guess Arathon's just dumped this on them and left. He still kind of seemed to understand it, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of description of this, but we get the sense that he had some difficult growing up to do, which we would have expected based on what happened at the end of the last book. But yeah, I love how little room it took to tell us, catch us up to him, tell us he's had a difficult life so far, and show what a strong man he has become or is about to become. So yeah, I really like that scene.
yeah, very well done. Yeah. Another question at the very end of the chapter 4, you had the the little news update there.
Yeah.
The last paragraph there.
Yeah.
They mentioned something about these armory walls bearing traces of an earth witch's marks of concealment. I had no idea what that was talking about. Does anybody know?
That will come up in a chapter or two.
Is that something that's going to come up later? Okay, and then there was also something that mentioned about treatises on black powder. Is that like a foreshadowing of like gunpowder or something, or is that something else?
It's briefly mentioned in the meeting, where they talk about Alestron and somebody messing around with black powder, and that ties into that snippet.
Yeah, they're talking about it. They're kind of oh, he's found the recipe again or something. They've rediscovered it, and then they were trying for that not to happen. From the sounds of it, is kind of what I got from.
So the wizards are against that, basically.
Yeah. They're oh, he's found it again, and they're they have to go and do something about it.
Okay.
I think was what was just I got of it anyway.
Yeah, so that seemed just like some seeds planted for future problems here. So
there is some good stuff coming.
I have no doubt.
Yes.
Another thing that I thought was interesting is the fact that they were only aware that they were going to live for 500 years. That was it was a discovery. I kind of thought that was like a known thing to everybody from early on in Curse.
Yeah.
The Coriani,
Yeah, but the drink from the fountain, and
yeah,
how the knock-on effect that had, insofar that this curse and this fight and this war was going to go on for a long time. They couldn't just wait it out. This was going to have a long-standing impact, and that obviously the knock-on effect of having Allura then have to lengthen her life as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that everybody's so surprised at the fact that they're going to be living for 500 years, because Dakar and Bahrain are both similarly long-lived, and they have and apparently it's the mage training that they receive to keep their body intact and not disintegrate and grow old. So given that Lysa and Arathon have at least that much mage powers, it seems like I would think that it's sort of a default for someone who can do sorcery. So yeah, I think maybe I'm just like repeating what you said, Chris, but yeah, it's interesting that
Yeah.
that everybody's
Yes.
so shocked all the time to hear that they're going to live for 500 years.
Also, I am sure, like 95% sure, that when they were talking, do you remember when they were having a big argument with oh god, the A wizard guy? I need to
Asandi?
write all
A
of these.
Sandir?
Yeah, that one, not Arathon Asande. But I'm sure they had a whole massive argument, and they were like going back and forth about him having kids or something. And he was just like, "I'm not going to have kids with anybody." And then he was like, "Well, you've got 500 years, so it might end up being that way." So I'm sure he knew about it, or have I just my 95% isn't that sure.
No,
I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was a discussion.
the
Yeah.
Coriani and Moriel kind of lambasts herself and her order with like, yeah, we should have realized this because where they came from, because they came via the fountain, but they had not.
Hmm.
And I think it's almost kind of one of those little tidbits to illuminate the they don't come out and say it, but the shortcomings of the Coriani in comparison to the Seven, because you see the Seven are just Sethvir and Asandir just casually following the strands of cause and effect, and Sethvir basically has localized omniscience of everything that's going on across the entire continent, and whereas the Coriani are just kind of scraping by, trying to draw conclusions where the Seven clearly have this much larger and more widespread view of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
think.
loved when. Oh, go.
Sorry. Oh, I was going to say, I think, Robin, you are right that the Fellowship do know that they're going to live for 500 years, because I think when Arathon is ill at the very beginning, when Asandi is trying to heal him, he finds out that they're going to live 500 years. My point was more about the fact that, that the fact that they're long lived seems to be surprising to other people, which I so far seems like a default for everyone. Um, all the sorcerers that we've met so far. So
Like, you too? You're also going to live this long?
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead now. You were saying something.
I was basically just going to say I thought it was really funny when the scout or whatever came to his door to give him a message, and he took the message and then just wrote down a bunch of other things that were also in her head that he hadn't been told just at the end of the message, just for like whatever reason. I thought that was kind of interesting about how you could see, obviously he's just got so much going on and coming in. That was really, again, it was another kind of backfill of his power and also what he does generally with his time, because that really wasn't investigated very far in the first book. And they go, you just get that little bit extra about him and what he's doing all that time in that tower.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's a nice contrast, I want to call it, between how powerful the magic is that the Fellowship can do, but how gently it is explained to us, like with the strands and everything. It's like a lot of like slow magical work, but on a very powerful scale. So even at that level, the fact that all this magic takes so long to cast, it's really interesting. I think, yeah, that haven't really seen that kind of thing done before. Magic is usually short and very what's what I'm looking for. I don't know, but
Short and
hopefully you know what I
flashy.
mean. Flashy, yes, that's the word I wanted.
And it's like they can do that, but for them it's mostly like very, very light touch.
It's okay, Varsha. We know it's early for you.
Good morning.
Well, I gotta say, I had to exercise some extreme restraint not to keep reading past chapter 4.
I am sitting here with. I'm honestly can't wait for the next meeting because we stopped at chapter 4, and I'm like, oh,
Because I'll be continuing on definitely
it's so good.
tonight.
Yeah.
And there's been
It felt
things
like
that people have said, and I'm like, no, I can't say anything. I can't say anything. They will get answers.
it feels like we've reached a bit of a tipping point though. Like I feel like the fun is going to be over very soon and things are going to get difficult.
You may be onto something there.
It depends on your definition of fun.
Fun, yeah. But I think it is interesting. Every time we come to a set of 4 chapters, it feels like one of like the perfect stopping point a lot of the time. You know, these 4
Yeah.
chapter runs.
Maybe it's that each chapter is so complete in itself
Yeah.
that any
Yeah.
stopping anywhere would be a good stopping point.
I think these chapters are quite unusual as to what I'm used to because they're quite chunky and they have subsections almost. So it's like it's not really a chapter as such, is how I find it. It's really weird. It's like a section and then you move on to the next section. I think it's completely different how I've read other books before. I'm enjoying it immensely, but it is they're very total in their each bit. So I think I go with you, Vash. I think whatever kind of section or chapter you finish on is almost a good place to bring it to a discussion.
Yeah, that seems to be her style and what people need to get used to when they're reading her stuff, and it feeds into her style. And it's I enjoy it a lot. I can't wait to get going tonight.
Because you read something like The Expanse, and The Expanse has a chapter every like 5 pages. And you
Yeah, but it's almost for The Expanse. At least you'd be like, I can read a chapter before bed.
right.
Because on this one, if you read a chapter before bed, you'd be up until Varsha now.
You definitely have to plan around it. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to bring up the cursed phrase from Lehane. I loved it, where he says "midsummer solstice." That's like his swear phrase. I just thought that's so kind of, even in a Janny style, that's so beautifully written, and such evocative images for it to be kind of like a thing of frustration.
That is funny.
I don't know why the series isn't more popular. Just even a book and a little bit through.
I mean, I do. I think there's a section in the middle of the first book that my wife's exactly there right now, and she's like, I just don't know if I know what's happening, and unless you have somebody else beside you saying you do, you know way more than you think you do. It doesn't matter. Just keep on going. I think there's that kind of feeling of, oh, I'm a bit lost, and I think once you get past that part, it's all gravy after that because this is good stuff, very good stuff.
Yeah, no, Chris, when were we discussing this? But I'm sure we discussed it, and I said the exact same thing. I was like, you're reading it, and I kind of feel like I'm really going back and I'm reading the paragraph, and I'm like, I'm still not quite there yet, but you've just got to trust it. It's just like, you've got to trust that in the next paragraph, you'll be like,
Yeah, exactly. It comes back around.
Okay.
And I think unless you have that prompt, you kind of feel like the book's too smart for you or something, or something that's more going on that you don't understand. It's going to be really important. And I think that's partly because it all feels important. And it's only when we get through to this point that, and one of the things I took away from speaking to Janny was, it'll come back around again. Don't worry about it. Don't fascinate it on the fact that the lane situation, that there are different lanes. It's coming back again. The magic of the fellowship, it's coming back again. You're going to get a bit more exploration, a bit more depth that'll add into it, and then you'll go, oh, I understand this a little bit more, and then you go.
Chibi, what did you feel like? Okay, because you said you read the second book first, and I'm finding this easier to read. So how did you find going to the first book later on, once you'd already know the characters and the writing style? Did you find it? Do you think you would have found it harder the other way around?
I don't think I would have. But as I mentioned, I had read other, I'd read Cycle of Fire and Master of White Storm and, several others by her by that point. So that was part of why I, saw it, because the cover art and everything struck me as very similar to Master of White Storm. And then I saw the name and I was like, oh, I'm like, I know this. I want this because I enjoyed that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And but I can see, and some of that is hindsight now, just giving it a more critical eye. I can see how people are put off by the first book in some ways. I don't. I mean, I can see why they would be. I don't entirely understand it, but because I'm like, I didn't ever, even starting the second book and then coming back, I never had problems with following it. But I was a extreme book nerd, so Hobbit and Lord of the Rings very early. So.
Yeah, well, it's a skill to reading too. The more you read, the more skill about reading you pick up. So, if you've been a reader all your life, I don't think you would have any problem getting into this.
To me, it was like my family would used to joke that I basically taught myself to read, and then got the books that just once I got a hold of books, I was but
it's a skill for life.
Like for books that I can think of where I've tried to read the first in the series and I bounced off of it and didn't come back to it because I was like 15, 16. And if you've heard her talk about it, Jenny said that, this is kind of intended for an adult audience, as far as reading comprehension. So I was definitely not the intended audience, but I never had a problem.
I would say that when I was younger, though, I was much more... I felt more able to just go with the flow because I didn't expect to understand it all. Yeah. I think as you get older, you expect to understand what you're reading. So maybe that's making it kind of harder. Because when I was young, I used to read books and not understand half of it and just enjoy the reading process. Yeah. So I think maybe that's kind of as you get older, you kind of want to be fed all of that. And maybe this one's a little bit harder because you've got to work for it a little bit more. Although I said we've all enjoyed it, we've all loved it. It's really good. But I think you do have to, as we said, go with the flow and then just try and slow down and go with it. Whereas in a lot of books, The Expanse actually is a good example. They spoon feed you. It's entirely different, so it's much easier to get into.
I wonder if there's a thing where somebody goes, they're reading this, going, "This seems really good. This seems really dense," but nobody talks about this series. It must be crap.
Yeah.
I think it's like I've dropped into Reddit a couple times with my reviews and trying to get people in there, and it's like I get people viewing it, but no one really comments, and I'm like, it's kind of disappointing. I'm like, other than people who've already read it, and they're like, "This is great," and but other people, every once in a while, when you get someone who just rolls it, swans in, just basically like and then they're like, oh, blah 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 blah, it starts trashing the prose or whatever, and I'm like, okay,
stop hitting my favorite book.
But we live in a world where the most popular fantasy series are enormous, epic, like quite dense. I
mean, is Sanderson dense? You think? I think that's probably the most popular. Would you consider that dense?
He's definitely not, but I'm thinking more Jordan.
Sanderson's easy to read.
I'm thinking, Erickson and, any of the really big, massive, long tomes that sort of mirror this in sort of length, if nothing else.
Most popular is probably Martin, but
that's true. But he's not finished either, so maybe he goes there.
Because I think certain places like Reddit or certain areas have like their favorite books that they're like. Certain series get a lot of attention and like constantly, even after you read them, they get lots of attention. I think with Malazan, just because I think it's a good series to compare to this one. I think because you don't know what's happening, like you have to just go with it. Like Robin said, you have to just like. That was a good point too. Like, I think we get into a certain rhythm and we want to know certain things before we keep going. But just letting go, and I think people encouraging other people to read Malazan and say you're not going to get it, just keep going. I think this series needs people like that just to say, look, you may not understand, it'll pay off, just keep reading. So maybe things like this will help, but
it's possible. Malazan to me also kind of shows its origins in having been a role-playing campaign. because you have these moments where you have these some of these characters quite obviously show their this was someone's player character, or started out as someone's player character. And I don't want to disparage his work because I've read most of them, and I didn't, I didn't dislike it, but I just there's certain things there you can definitely see, and it's just sort of like you get them like, it's one kind of just veering off here for a second, but it's one chapter. When I found out about the RPG thing, and and then I think of a scene with Quick Ben, I think it is the character.
Yeah.
And he meets Bashaline and Corporal Broach,
Mhm.
and he has this fight with them. And when I found out about the RPG thing, I'm like, oh, I can totally see the, this all the hallmarks of this having been an RPG campaign all over the entire scene. It was a cool scene, but I'm like this, yeah. So it has I don't know, lots of moments of here's a really cool thing that's happening, and I don't know, people like that. I agree. I don't think Sanderson is very dense, though.
No.
I think Sanderson needs an editor, at least as far as Stormlight goes. But that's neither here nor there.
He's not trying to write these books, though. He's that's not his
No,
intent.
yeah.
It is not to write anything as deliberate as this.
Yeah. I mean, and with Malazan, those scenes, that scene you're talking about, are pretty few and far between. It's just them having fun. It doesn't, the rest of the series there's a lot more to it. But yeah, I agree with Wurts. I just think that's one of the things that I wish more people would go on about is that same kind of fervor and saying, hey, just stick with it. You're going to get it. And it's going to be rewarding when you're done.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's going to be rewarding. It's going to give you that sense of that aesthetic reaction that you're looking for,
I think going into this one, not having someone to help you along, like, I think just going into this book blind and going into Malazan, I think this is a lot less confusing than Malazan is. A lot less confusing.
Yeah, it doesn't throw fantasy like it uses new world terminology very sparingly, I think, and when it does, it's pretty clear from the context what it is. So I don't know of any reason to not really follow along very well, at least in the beginning, except for like maybe a harder vocabulary than we might be used to. But it's not confusing in the way other fantasy books might be, where it's just a lot of words that you don't understand. Like that's one of the reasons like people tend to find Malazan confusing in the beginning. Is just it's a lot of words that you don't understand. Like what does a warden mean? What is that? And I didn't feel like that reading these books. So they're not even very difficult to follow world building wise. So yeah.
No, not at all. Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more of a style that people need to get used to, and I think once you do, it's awesome. I love her style.
What's the? It's not instant gratification.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
But it doesn't have a long run. Like I'd say by 14, 15 chapters in, and you get to the end of the first book, you're like, right, okay, I'm in this. Like I can read this quite easily. I could, there's this is really. That's only like 80 pages in The Expanse.
Yeah, we have a pretty good sense of things. Like just using the Malazan comparison, as I read through them, I was like, what is this? Where am I? What is even happening? I was like, am I in the past, present? I don't understand. I'm on a whole other continent. Who are these people? I was just reading about these other guys the last book, and now I'm somewhere else entirely. And I did half the time I was like, I don't understand how any of this ties together, because it just seems like there was just more and more stuff being thrown at me. And
yeah, Wurts isn't doing that. She's telling you a story, and
it's very tightly focused.
It's very tightly focused, yeah. And Malazan, that's by design, partially. So it's a different experience.
Yeah, Varsha's gonna have a lot of work on her hands when we start here in July. Lots of questions for Varsha. I don't know if you're up for it, Varsha. It's going to be a lot.
So I'm gonna see how much I understand on my second read through. Hopefully a lot more than the first, but also I can freely Google things when I finish the series. So
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that.
yes.
For those who don't know, just to pitch it really quick, Varsha will be our guide. So on her channel, we're going to restart Malazan here in July or so, and we're going to be meeting. We're not sure how often, but a very relaxed reading pace to read Malazan. So anyone who's interested, it's going to be an undertaking, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's my favorite series so far of all the ones I've read. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about it the way we're doing this one.
Yeah, it's
It's
fun.
going to be good. Yeah. So anything else from these first four that you guys can think of?
All talked out.
Yeah, I think so.
Jared just needs the stream to end so they can go straight into
Yeah.
picking up chapter 5.
It's like, all talked out, need more to read now.
Before we sign off, Chibipo, can you tell us where people can find you if they want to get in touch?
Of course. I can be found on Twitter at chibipo1 because someone had already had the without a 1, and I'm not going to try to navigate it to see if I can get the 1, without a 1 because Twitter is Twitter right now, so I'll just leave it at that. Everybody knows. I'm also on Goodreads, and I'm going to plug just very briefly here for everybody. Though if you haven't read all the way through, you might not want to watch, or listen. But Under the Radar, Blaze is going to have a podcast very soon. I absolutely don't know any dates for this, but there's probably going to be some pretty big announcements there. So, stay tuned. Very
Nice.
soon. Very, very soon. That's all for me.
Nice. Chris?
You can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just up my name, Chris Moan. You can find me on the PageTune forums, or you can find me on Twitter at 7 o'clock shadow, lurking, posting replies, liking people's posts, that kind of thing.
Jared?
You can find me on my channel, The Fantasy Thinker, and I'm on Instagram at The Fantasy Thinker as well. And I'm also on the Page Chewing forums.
Yes. And Robin, don't plug Pop-Tarts.
You can't find me at Pop Tarts. You might find me eating Pop Tarts.
Any Pop-Tarts.
Any Pop-Tarts. Very true. Yeah, you can find me at Bookend and Biscuits, my YouTube channel, or Book and Biscuit, just singular, on Twitter, where I'm relatively active. I am on Instagram, but I think we've discussed before, don't really go on there a lot, or on Page Chewing forums, which are awesome. So yeah.
And Varsha with the best outro ever.
You can find me on my YouTube channel, Reading by the Rainy Mountain, and more direct ways to reach me on the About page.
Nice. Just our friend Layla couldn't make it today on stream. Layla Gaushi just want to plug her YouTube channel at Ballady Magazine. Be sure and go by and subscribe, and also Ballady Magazine on Twitter, or Layla Gaushi on Twitter as well. Be sure and check it out. Lots of great stuff over there. So hopefully Layla can join the next one. So until in 2 weeks, we'll be discussing 5 through 9.
Yep.
And
5, 6.
math is hard.
Is it 8 or 9? 8, 5.
I think it's 8.
5, 6, 7, 8.
8,
Yeah.
5 through 8. Okay. 5 through 8. Sorry. Jeez. So anyway,
You should do more streams in a day, Steve. This doesn't seem like enough.
no, I really shouldn't. Yeah. That
You won't even
that
talk for 6 hours.
that Baker stream was something. So
Oh,
yeah,
boy.
that was a fun one. But so anyway, go ahead,
the
Jacob.
thumbnail for your channel update that you posted earlier, where you're holding the hardback of Ships, and you just got this little smug look on your face. You're like, yeah, I have a hardcover. And you
Yeah.
I have to, I gotta show it off when I can.
got to flex.
Yeah, gotta flex when I can. Yeah. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see everyone here in 2 weeks for the next 4 chapters, and looking forward to it. So we'll see everyone then.
See you then.
Thanks. Bye.